You know how some people just can't sit still, how they always need to be doing something, touching something, chasing something new. Well, imagine that restless energy, but give it the power to shake mountains. That was Zeus, king of all gods. Had hands that could throw lightning like you throw a ball. He had eyes that saw everything happening in the world below. And he had a heart that just couldn't stay in one place. Before he became a menace, he was just a baby hidden in a cave. Picture this, a tiny island called Crete, white cliffs rising from blue water, and deep in the mountains, a cave that smelled like honey and warm milk. That's where Zeus grew up. His father, Cronus, had this terrible habit. He ate his children, not because he was hungry, but because he was afraid. A prophecy said one of his kids would overthrow him someday. So Cronus figured, no kids, no problems. But Zeus's mother, Rhea, had other plans. When Zeus was born, she wrapped a stone in blankets and handed it to her husband. "Here's your son," she said, apparently. And he was raised by the gentlest creatures you can imagine. Nymphs who found him had voices like flowing water. They sang him to sleep with lullabies older than memory. Their hands were soft as flower petals when they touched his cheek. A goat named Amalthea became his nurse. She let him drink her milk, which tasted like sunshine in dreams. When Zeus laughed, which was often, Amalthea would nuzzle his tiny fingers with her warm nose. The bees brought him honey that glowed golden in the cave's dim light. It was the sweetest thing in the world, and Zeus would lick it from their offerings with the satisfaction of a child who knows he's loved. Some stories echo through time, and this one echoes because it's about finding family in unexpected places. Zeus learned gentleness from creatures who had no reason to be gentle with him. He learned trust from beings who could have left him to starve. He learned love from hearts that chose to care for him. But even as a baby, Zeus was different. When he cried, the cave walls would shake. When he giggled, sparks would dance in the air above his crib. When he reached for things, they would move toward his tiny hands before he could touch them. The nymphs would exchange glances. This wasn't an ordinary child. As Zeus grew, so did his power. At age 5, he could make rain fall inside the cave just by wishing for it. At 10, he could call lightning to his fingertips, like other kids called their pet dogs. But the most remarkable thing about young Zeus wasn't his power, it was his heart. He shared his honey with every creature in the cave. He would sit for hours just listening to the stories the wind told him. "You have a gift," the eldest nymph told him one day. "But your greatest gift isn't your lightning. It's your ability to feel what others feel." Zeus nodded seriously. At 12, he already understood that power without compassion was dangerous. If only he'd remembered that lesson later. The day came when Zeus had to leave the cave. He was 16, tall and strong, with eyes that held storms. The nymphs knew they couldn't keep him hidden forever. "Your father still rules the world," they warned him. "He still eats his children. He still fears the prophecy." Zeus touched each nymph's face gently. "Then it's time to fulfill that prophecy. But first, he had to free his brothers and sisters. They were still trapped in Cronus's stomach somehow, alive in that dark, cramped space. Zeus had a plan, and like all his plans, it was completely ridiculous. He disguised himself as a servant and brought his father a special drink. It was wine mixed with mustard and salt. It tasted exactly as horrible as it sounds. Cronus drank it without question. Apparently, being a king doesn't make you careful either. Within minutes, Cronus was throwing up everything he'd ever swallowed. Out came Poseidon, god of the sea, covered in digestive juice, but otherwise fine. Out came Hades, god of the underworld, looking understandably grumpy. out came Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, the three sisters who would become some of the most powerful goddesses in history. And out came that stone Rhea had tricked Cronus into swallowing years ago. Zeus's family reunion was messy, but it worked. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and Zeus's heart beat with the rhythm of revolution, the war. That followed was called the Titanomachy. It lasted 10 years. Zeus and his siblings fought their father and all the old gods who supported him. It was brutal. It was bloody. It shook the foundations of the world. But Zeus had something his father didn't. He had the loyalty of those who chose to follow him, not the fear of those who had to. The nymphs who raised him fought beside him. The creatures of the earth rallied to his cause. Even some of the titans switched sides. Tired of Cronus's paranoid rule, Zeus discovered something important during that war. He was a natural leader, not because he was the strongest, though he was. Not because he was the smartest, though he wasn't stupid. He was a leader because he genuinely cared about the people fighting beside him. When one of his soldiers was hurt, Zeus felt it in his own chest. When someone was afraid, Zeus would find them after the battle and ask how they were doing. When someone did something brave, Zeus made sure everyone knew about it. This wasn't strategy. This was just who Zeus was. The same heart that would later get him in trouble. With love was the heart that won him a war. Finally, after a decade of fighting, Zeus stood over his defeated father. Cronus lay broken in the dust, his army scattered, his power gone. Zeus could have killed him. Most would have. Cronus had earned death 100 times over. But Zeus remembered the gentle hands that had raised him. He remembered the lesson about power and compassion. So he banished Cronus to the deepest part of the underworld. Alive but powerless, defeated but not destroyed. Let him think about what he's done, Zeus told his brothers, for a very long time. Then Zeus and his siblings divided up the world. Poseidon got the oceans, Hades got the underworld. Zeus got the sky, but really, Zeus got the hardest job. He became the king of everything. At first, he handled it well. He was fair. He was just. He listened to problems and tried to solve them. He protected the innocent and punished the guilty for a few years. Zeus was exactly the kind of king the world needed. But then he noticed something. Being king was lonely. His brothers had their own realms to rule. His sisters had their own responsibilities. The other gods came to him with problems, not friendship. Zeus would sit on his throne at the end of long days, looking out over the world he'd won. Everything was orderly. Everything was empty. That's when he started paying attention to the mortals below. They laughed with each other. They cried with each other. They held hands and shared meals and told stories by firelight. They had something Zeus had lost when he became king. They had connection. Some stories echo through time because they warn us about the price of power. Zeus had everything he'd ever wanted, but he'd traded his ability to be close to people for the ability to rule them. And Zeus, who'd learned love from nymphs and trust from a goat, couldn't live without connection. So he started looking for it in the only place he knew how. He started falling in love, not with other gods who were too much like him, not with his equals who understood his burden. He fell in love with mortals, people who lived short, bright lives, people who loved without thinking about consequences, people who could touch him without fearing his power. The first time Zeus transformed himself to visit a mortal, he told himself it was just curiosity. He'd be careful. He'd be gentle. He'd leave before anyone got hurt. But when he looked into mortal eyes that saw him as just another person, not a king or a god, something in his chest cracked open. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be loved. For himself, Zeus's heart beat with the rhythm of longing, and once he started, he couldn't stop. The boy who'd been raised by gentle nymphs grew into a man who needed gentleness more than air. The king who'd won his throne through compassion became a god who couldn't resist the call of a compassionate heart. But it was also about to become a lot more human. The story continues. Let yourself drift peacefully into dreams of mountain caves and honey-sweet milk, knowing that even the mightiest among us were once children who just wanted to be loved. Hera, the wife who knew what she signed up for. Let me tell you about the most patient woman in all of mythology. And no, that's not a compliment. Hera knew exactly what kind of man she was marrying. Zeus had a reputation that traveled faster than his own lightning bolts. Everyone on Mount Olympus had heard the stories. Everyone knew about his wandering eye. But Hera looked at this chaotic king and thought, I can fix him. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and sometimes those rhythms include spectacularly bad judgment. Picture their first meeting. Hera was the goddess of marriage and family. She had standards. She had dignity. She had a 5-year plan. Zeus saw her and immediately forgot how to form complete sentences. You're beautiful, he stammered, like a teenage boy talking to his first crush. This was the king of the gods, the man who commanded thunder, and he was nervous. Hera raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. I know that should have been Zeus's first clue. Hera didn't need his validation. She didn't need his power. She didn't need anything from him except basic respect. But Zeus was already smitten, and when Zeus got smitten, he got stupid. Their courtship was actually sweet. Zeus would visit Hera every day, bringing her gifts. Not expensive gifts, thoughtful ones. Flowers that only bloomed in moonlight. Wine that tasted like summer rain. Stories he'd heard from mortals about love. For a few months, Zeus was the perfect boyfriend, attentive, faithful, present. Hera began to think maybe she'd been wrong about him. Maybe he really could change. Maybe love was enough. Some stories echo through time because they remind us that love makes everyone a little bit foolish. The wedding was legendary. Every god and goddess attended. The ceremony lasted 3 days. The celebration lasted 3 weeks. Mount Olympus had never seen anything like it. Zeus promised to be faithful. He said the words with tears in his eyes. He meant them with every fiber of his being, for exactly 6 months. Then he saw a pretty nymph bathing in a forest stream. And Zeus thought, one little flirtation won't hurt anyone. That's how it started. Not with malice, not with cruelty, just with weakness, like looking at a sunset. You can admire a sunset without wanting to marry it, but appreciation became conversation. Conversation became connection. Connection became a secret meeting in the woods. Zeus came home that night and kissed Hera on the forehead. I love you, he said, and he meant it. Zeus genuinely believed he could love his wife and still chase every pretty thing that caught his eye. This man had the emotional intelligence of a golden retriever. Hera knew immediately, not because she caught him, not because someone told her. She knew because she knew Zeus. She could read the guilt in his shoulders, the way he avoided her eyes, the way he suddenly became very interested in what they were having for dinner. Where were you today? She asked casually. Nowhere special, Zeus said, which was technically true. The forest clearing wasn't particularly special, just private. Hera nodded. Zeus thought he'd gotten away with it. Hera was planning his funeral. But here's the thing about Hera. She didn't just love Zeus. She loved the idea of marriage. She loved the institution of commitment. She loved the dream of building something beautiful together. So instead of leaving him, she decided to fight for their marriage, her way. The next morning, Zeus woke up to find that every mirror in their palace showed him as he really was. Not the handsome king of the gods, but a man with cheater written across his forehead in glowing letters. Hera, Zeus called out, his voice echoing through the marble halls. We need to talk. She appeared in a swirl of golden light, looking absolutely radiant. About what, my love? About my face? What about it? I think it's very honest. Zeus learned his first lesson about Hera's revenge style. She had flair. The glowing letters lasted a week. Every god and goddess Zeus met would look at his forehead and try not to laugh. The mortals who prayed to him would get very confused about why their supreme deity had words floating above his eyebrows. Zeus apologized. He begged. He promised it would never happen again. Hera forgave him. The letters disappeared. Zeus lasted 3 months. This time before he appreciated another pretty mortal. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and Zeus's heart had the rhythm of a man who never learned from his mistakes. The second time, Hera turned Zeus's lightning bolts pink. Not permanently, just for a month. Every time he got angry and tried to throw dramatic thunder around, pretty pink sparkles would shoot from his hands. Hard to maintain your dignity as king of the gods, when your ultimate power looks like a fairy godmother's wand. The third time, Hera made Zeus speak only in rhyming couplets for 2 weeks. Try conducting serious divine business when everything you say sounds like a nursery rhyme. The mortals need rain for their crops to grow, Zeus would announce to his court. That's nice, my king, but why do you sound like a children's show? Zeus would turn red with embarrassment. But he kept cheating, because Zeus had convinced himself that his affairs weren't really betrayals. They were just adventures. Hera was his wife. These other women were just entertainment. He genuinely didn't understand why Hera was so upset. In his mind, he always came home to her. He always loved her most. The others were just pretty distractions. This man had the emotional depth of a puddle, but Hera understood something Zeus didn't. Every affair wasn't just about the other woman. It was about the promise he'd broken, the trust he'd shattered, the marriage he'd damaged. So she stopped trying to change him and started making him face consequences. The fourth affair, Hera made Zeus temporarily mortal. For 1 full month, he was just a regular human. No powers, no lightning, no divine authority. Just a man who had to walk everywhere and got tired and stubbed his toe on furniture. Zeus spent 30 days learning what it felt like to be powerless, what to be ignored, to be ordinary. Now you know, Hera said, when his powers returned, how the women you charm feel when you abandon them. Zeus looked at his wife with new eyes. I never thought about it that way. You never think about it anyway. That's the problem. Some stories echo through time because they show us that even gods can grow. Sometimes Zeus tried to be better. He really did. For almost a year, he was faithful. He focused on his wife. He worked on their marriage. He even started asking Hera about her day instead of just talking about his own. Hera began to hope again. Maybe this time was different. Maybe he'd finally learned. Then Europa happened. Zeus saw the most beautiful mortal woman he'd ever encountered. She was picking flowers by the seaside, her hair catching the sunlight like spun gold. And Zeus thought, I'll just go talk to her. What's the harm in conversation? But Zeus couldn't. What just talk to mortals as himself? Too intimidating, too complicated. So he decided to be creative. He turned himself into a bull, not just any bull, the most magnificent bull in history, white as fresh snow, gentle as a lamb, with flowers mysteriously braided into his horns. Europa saw this beautiful creature and thought, what a sweet cow. She petted his nose. She fed him grass. She even climbed on his back for a ride. That's when Zeus revealed his true nature, not by transforming back, by swimming across the Mediterranean Sea with Europa on his back. Muhu, Zeus said, which translated to, trust me, this is romantic. What is happening? Europa screamed, which translated to, this is the weirdest Tuesday ever. They had a lovely time on the island, where Zeus finally revealed himself. Europa was surprisingly chill about the whole divine kidnapping thing. They spent weeks together, talking and laughing, and creating what would eventually become the entire continent of Europe. Zeus was happier than he'd been in years. Europa was beautiful and kind, and didn't know enough about his reputation to judge him, but eventually he had to go home. Hera was waiting for him in their bedroom. She was sitting on their bed, perfectly calm. Her hair was brushed. Her dress was neat. Her hands were folded in her lap. Did you have a nice trip? She asked politely. Zeus's stomach dropped. This was worse than the yelling. This was worse than the revenge pranks. This was Hera being disappointed. Hera, I can explain, I'm sure. You can. You always can. Zeus sat beside her on the bed. I love you. You know that, right? I know you think you do. I do love you. More than anyone. More than anything. Hera looked at him with eyes that held centuries of patience. Zeus, you love me the way a child loves a favorite toy. You want me to be there when you need me. You want me to wait while you play with other things. You want me to forgive you when you break the rules. That's not. But love isn't about having someone wait for you. It's about choosing not to make them wait. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and sometimes those rhythms sound like breaking. Zeus wanted to argue. He wanted to explain. He wanted to make her understand that his affairs meant nothing, that she was the only one who mattered. But looking at Hera's face, he realized she already understood. She understood better than he did. I don't know how to stop, he admitted quietly. I know. Hera's voice was gentle, not angry, just sad. Why, I'm not asking you to anymore. What do you mean? I mean I'm done trying to change you. I'm done hoping you'll become the husband I deserve. I'm done breaking my own heart every time you prove you're exactly who you've always been. Zeus felt something cold settle in his chest. Are you leaving me? No. I'm the goddess of marriage. I don't believe in divorce. But I'm also done pretending this is a real marriage. She stood up, smoothing her dress. From now on, we're king and queen. We're partners in ruling. We're allies in power. But we're not husband and wife. Not in the way that matters. I'll still run our kingdom. I'll still be your queen, but I won't be your wife. Not the kind who whips, not the kind who forgives, not the kind who pretends your affairs don't matter. Zeus watched her walk toward the door. What about love? She paused without turning around. I'll always love you, Zeus. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Zeus sat alone in their bedroom, surrounded by the life they'd built together. Everything was still there. The bed they'd shared, the art they'd collected, the memories they'd made. But something fundamental had changed. Hera had stopped fighting for their marriage. She'd stopped believing he would change. And Zeus realized, for the first time, what he'd actually lost. Not just his wife's forgiveness, not just her patience. He'd lost her hope. He'd lost her belief that he could be better. He'd lost the woman who'd loved him enough to keep trying. Some stories echo through time because they show us the true cost of our choices. Zeus got to keep his kingdom. He got to keep his power. He got to keep his freedom. but he lost the one person who'd seen him at his worst and still believed he could be better. The saddest part, he'd lost her long before she stopped fighting for him. He'd lost her the first time he chose someone else over the promise he'd made. Zeus would spend the rest of eternity learning what Hera already knew. You can't love someone and constantly hurt them. You can't commit to someone and constantly betray them. You can't have everything you want without losing what you need. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms. Zeus's heart would beat with the rhythm of regret for the rest of time. The story continues. Let yourself drift peacefully, knowing that even gods must face the consequences of their choices. The goddess hookup chronicles after Hera stopped trying to fix him. Zeus did what any emotionally stunted king would do. He decided the problem wasn't his behavior. The problem was dating mortals. I need someone who understands divine life, he told himself. Someone who gets the pressures of immortality. Someone who won't judge me for having appetites. This man could rationalize anything, so Zeus turned his attention to his fellow goddesses. After all, they were his equals. They had their own power. They wouldn't be so fragile about his need for variety. Zeus was about to learn that goddesses don't play the same games as mortal women. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and sometimes those rhythms include spectacularly bad decision-making. His first target was Demeter, goddess of the harvest. She controlled all the crops in the world. She made sure mortals had bread and wine and olive oil. She was practical, down-to-earth, and absolutely gorgeous. Zeus approached her with his usual confidence. Demeter, beautiful goddess of abundance, would you honor me with your company? Demeter looked up from the wheat field she was tending. For what purpose? For companionship, conversation, connection? You mean sex? Zeus choked on his own saliva. Mortals never talked this directly. Well, if the mood strikes us, the mood strikes you right now. I can smell the want on you from here. Zeus had never met a woman who was so completely unbothered by his charm. It was terrifying. It was refreshing. It was incredibly attractive. Yes, he admitted. I want you. Good. I want you to. But I have conditions. Zeus blinked. I don't do jealousy. I don't do romantic proclamations. You want to sleep with me? Fine. But don't pretend it's love. Zeus felt like he'd been hit by his own lightning bolt. A goddess who wanted him without wanting to change him, who enjoyed pleasure without demanding promises. Deal, he said immediately. Their affair was everything Zeus thought he wanted. Demeter was passionate but practical. She enjoyed their time together, but never asked where he'd been or where he was going. She never got jealous when he flirted with other women. She treated him like a very attractive friend with benefits. For exactly 3 weeks, Zeus was in heaven. Finally, a woman who understood him, who didn't try to cage him, who let him be himself. He realized something uncomfortable. He was bored, not with Demeter. She was wonderful, but Zeus discovered he actually liked the chase. He liked winning someone over. He liked the drama of sneaking around. He liked feeling wanted and needed and essential to someone's happiness. Demeter treated him like a pleasant hobby, nice to have around, but not necessary for her joy. Zeus had spent so long complaining about clingy women that he'd never realized he was the clingy one. Some stories echo through time because they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Zeus went things with Demeter as awkwardly as possible. I think we should see other people. We already are seeing other people, Demeter replied, not looking up from her gardening. I've been sleeping with that river god for weeks. What? You thought we were exclusive? You literally told me you don't do commitment. Zeus felt a strange sensation in his chest. It took him a moment to identify it. Jealousy. He was jealous of the river god. But we have something special, he protested. We have good chemistry. That's not the same thing. Demeter finally looked at him, and her expression was almost gentle. Zeus, you want to be the center of someone's universe, but you don't want to make anyone the center of yours. That's not how connection works. Zeus left that conversation feeling more confused than ever. What did he actually want? He decided to try a different approach. Instead of practical Demeter, he'd pursue someone intellectual, someone who could match his wit and challenge his mind. Enter Themis, goddess of divine justice and law. Themis was everything Zeus admired in a woman. Smart, powerful, principled. She ran the cosmic court system. She made sure contracts were honored and oaths were kept. She also had absolutely no patience for Zeus's usual nonsense. I find you fascinating, Zeus told her over dinner. Your mind is incredible. Thank you. Your mind is adequate. Zeus laughed. Just adequate. You're intelligent, but you use your intelligence to rationalize poor choices instead of making better ones. That's brutally honest. I'm the goddess of justice. Honesty is literally my job. Zeus found himself working harder to impress Themis than he'd worked for anyone in centuries. She didn't care about his power. She didn't care about his status. She cared about his character. And Zeus's character was questionable, but he tried. For Themis, he tried to be better. He read philosophy. He studied law. He attempted to make fair decisions instead of impulsive ones. Their relationship was unlike anything Zeus had experienced. Themis challenged him. She made him think. She made him want to be worthy of her respect. For almost a year, Zeus was faithful to Themis, not because he'd lost interest in other women, but because he was genuinely trying to become the kind of man who deserved her. Then he met a nymph named Io. Was everything Themis wasn't. Soft where Themis was strong. Emotional where Mrs. was logical. Vulnerable where Themis was invulnerable. Zeus told himself he was just being kind. Io was upset about something. He was just offering comfort. But comfort became flirtation. Flirtation became temptation. Temptation became a secret meeting in the woods. Zeus came home to Themis that night, carrying the weight of his betrayal like a stone in his chest. How was your day? Fine, Zeus lied. Themis set down her scroll and looked at him, really looked at him. Zeus, I'm the goddess of justice. I can literally sense when someone is lying. Zeus's face went white. I can explain. You slept with someone else. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Zeus wanted to deny it. He wanted to minimize it. He wanted to make excuses. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. Yes, Themis nodded calmly. I see. It didn't mean anything, Zeus said desperately. It was just, I don't know, a moment of weakness. A moment of weakness. Themis repeated the words, like she was testing their weight. You chose to pursue another woman. You chose to touch her. You chose to betray our relationship, and you call that weakness. Yes. No, Zeus. Weakness is when you fail despite trying your best. What you did was make a choice, a deliberate choice to value your momentary pleasure over our relationship. Zeus felt like he was being cross-examined in cosmic court, which, in a way, he was. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know you are. You're always sorry. But sorry doesn't change anything. Sorry doesn't undo the choice. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Themis stood up and walked to their window, looking out at the stars. I thought you were different with me. I thought you actually wanted to be better. I do want to be better. No, You want to be better. There's a difference. Zeus felt something crack inside his chest. What does that mean? It means you like the idea of being a good man more than you like doing the work of being a good man. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and sometimes those rhythms sound like truth we don't want to hear. Themis turned back to face him. Zeus, you're not evil, you're not cruel, but you're selfish. You want love without sacrifice. You want loyalty without commitment. You want connection without responsibility. That's not true. Then prove it. Choose me. Actually choose me, not just when it's easy or convenient. Choose me when it's hard. Choose me when there's a beautiful woman flirting with you. Choose me when you're bored or lonely or tempted. Zeus wanted to promise her he would. He wanted to swear he'd changed. He wanted to make her believe he could be the man she deserved. But, looking into Themis's eyes, he realized she already knew his answer. I can't, he whispered. I know, I want to. I really want to. I know that too. Themis walked over to him and placed her hand gently on his cheek. Zeus, I don't think you're capable of the kind of love I need. And that's not your fault. But it's also not my responsibility to accept less than I deserve. So this is it. We're over. We're over. Zeus felt like he'd been sentenced in her cosmic court, found guilty of being exactly who he'd always been. But the strangest part was that Themis didn't seem angry. She seemed disappointed, like she'd hoped he would surprise her. I'll always care about you, she said softly. But I won't waste any more time hoping you'll become someone you're not. Zeus watched another goddess walk away from him, but this time he understood why. He wasn't losing Themis because of bad luck or circumstances. He was losing her because of choices. His choices. Some stories echo through time because they show us that love isn't enough. You also need compatibility. You also need shared values. You also need the ability to choose each other every day. Zeus had love. He had passion. He had genuine feelings for these goddesses, but he didn't have the ability to choose them over his own desires. After Themis left, Zeus sat alone in his palace and faced an uncomfortable truth. The problem wasn't that he was dating the wrong women. The problem was that he was the wrong man. He thought about Hera, who'd loved him enough to keep trying. He thought about Demeter, who'd been honest about what she wanted. He thought about Themis, who'd challenged him to be better. All of them had seen something in him worth loving. All of them had offered him different kinds of happiness, and he'd thrown it all away because he couldn't resist the next pretty face. Zeus realized he had two choices. He could keep pursuing goddesses who were his equals, women who would see through his charm and demand he actually change, or he could go back to chasing mortals who would be impressed by his power and forgive his flaws. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and Zeus's heart beat with the rhythm of a man who always chose the easier path. The next morning, Zeus was scanning the earth for beautiful mortal women. He told himself he was just being practical. Mortals understood that gods were different. They didn't expect him to be perfect. They were grateful for his attention. But deep down, Zeus knew the truth. He was choosing mortals because they wouldn't demand he grow up. He was choosing women who would love him, despite his flaws, instead of goddesses who would challenge him to overcome them. It was the easier choice, the more comfortable choice, the more cowardly choice, but it was still a choice. And Zeus was about to learn that even easy choices have consequences. The story continues. Let yourself drift peacefully, knowing that even gods must face the truth about themselves eventually. Europa, the bull move that started everything Zeus, had made his choice. No more complicated goddesses with their standards and expectations. No more women who saw through his charm and demanded he actually grow as a person. He was going back to mortals, sweet, simple mortals, who would be grateful for divine attention. This man was about to learn that simple doesn't mean consequence-free. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and Zeus's heart was beating with the rhythm of a man who never learned from his mistakes. His first target was a princess named Europa. She lived by the sea in a place that would eventually be named after her. Though she didn't know that yet, Europa was everything Zeus thought he wanted. Beautiful, obviously, but also kind. She spent her days helping her people, tending to children, feeding stray animals. She had a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. Most importantly, she had no idea who Zeus was. Zeus watched her from the clouds for weeks. He studied her habits, her favorite places, her daily routines. He learned that she loved flowers and sunsets and the sound of waves. He was planning the perfect approach. Something romantic, something memorable, something that would sweep her off her feet. Then Zeus had what he thought was a brilliant idea. I'll transform into something harmless, something beautiful, something she can't resist. Some stories echo through time because they show us that brilliant ideas and stupid ideas often look exactly the same. Zeus decided to become a bull. Not just any bull, the most magnificent bull in the history of bulls. Snow-white coat, gentle brown eyes, flowers mysteriously woven into his horns. He was basically the Disney prince of livestock. Zeus positioned himself in the meadow where Europa walked every morning. He lay down gracefully in the grass, looking majestic and completely non-threatening. Europa came walking through the field, humming to herself. She was wearing a simple white dress that caught the morning light. Her hair was braided with small flowers. She stopped when she saw Zeus. "Oh," she said softly. "Hello, beautiful." Zeus's heart did a little flip. She thought he was beautiful. Even as a cow. Europa approached him slowly, the way you approach any large animal. Her hands were gentle when she reached out to pet his nose. "Where did you come from?" she asked, scratching behind his ears. "You're the most gorgeous bull I've ever seen." Zeus had never been called gorgeous by someone who didn't know he was a god. It felt different, better, somehow. Europa spent the morning with him. She fed him grass from her hands. She told him about her day, her dreams, her worries. She talked to him like he was a friend who would understand. "I wish I could find a man as gentle as you," she said, running her fingers through his coat. "Someone kind and patient and beautiful." Zeus felt something twist in his chest. She was describing the kind of man he'd never been. The kind of man he'd never even tried to be. But lying there in the grass, being petted by this sweet girl who saw goodness in him, Zeus felt peaceful for the first time in centuries. Maybe he could be that man. Maybe he could be gentle and kind and patient. Maybe this time would be different. Europa climbed onto his back, trusting him completely. "Just a short ride," she said. "You seem so tame." That's when Zeus made his move. Instead of revealing himself like a gentleman, he stood up and walked toward the ocean. "Easy, boy," Europa said. "Not worried yet. Where are you going?" Zeus waded into the waves. Europa laughed, thinking it was playful. Even when the water reached his chest, she wasn't afraid. "You're a swimming bull," she giggled. "How wonderful." Zeus felt terrible. She trusted him so completely. She was delighted by what she thought was a magical adventure. She had no idea. She was being kidnapped. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms. And sometimes those rhythms include the moment when we realize we're doing something unforgivable. But Zeus was already committed. He couldn't turn back now without looking foolish. So he kept swimming. Europa's laughter faded as they moved further from shore. Wait, she said, her voice smaller now. What's happening? Where are we going? Zeus wanted to reassure her. He wanted to explain, but he was still a bull, and bulls don't talk. So he just kept swimming, hating himself more with every stroke. Europa began to panic. Please, she whispered, clinging to his neck. I want to go home. I want to go back to the shore. Zeus felt her tears falling onto his back. Each drop felt like acid on his conscience, but he was Zeus, king of the gods. He couldn't turn back. Now, that would be embarrassing. This man prioritized his ego over a frightened girl's tears. They swam for hours. Europa stopped talking. She just held on, crying quietly, probably thinking she was going to die. Zeus finally reached a beautiful island. White sand beaches, crystal blue water, flowers everywhere. He carried Europa to the shore and finally revealed himself. The transformation was gentle. In its place stood Zeus in all his divine glory, tall and handsome and radiating power. Europa scrambled backward, terror in her eyes. What are you? What's happening to me? Don't be afraid, Zeus said, though he knew it was too late for that. I'm Zeus, king of the gods. I won't hurt you. You already hurt me. Europa's voice, where cracked. You took me from my home. My family thinks I'm dead. Zeus felt the words like a slap. I wanted to meet you. I wanted to bring you somewhere beautiful. You wanted to meet me. So you tricked me. You lied to me. I transformed, yes, but you let me pet you. You let me talk to you. You let me trust you. Europa's tears were angry now. I told you things I've never told anyone. I told you about wanting to find a good man, and you were lying the whole time. Zeus had never seen his actions from this perspective. He'd thought he was being romantic, creative, charming, but Europa was right. He'd built their entire relationship on a lie. I'm sorry, he said helplessly. I didn't think. No, you didn't think. You saw something you wanted, and you took it. You didn't think about what I wanted. You didn't think about my family. You didn't think about my fear. Some stories echo through time because they force us to see ourselves through someone else's eyes. Zeus looked at Europa, beautiful, terrified, furious. Europa saw himself clearly for the first time in centuries. He was a kidnapper, a liar, a man who took what he wanted without asking permission. I can take you home, he offered quietly. Can you? Europa laughed bitterly. Can you undo the last 6 hours? Can you make my family stop grieving? Can you make me forget that the man I thought was gentle and kind turned out to be a monster? I'm not a monster. Then what do you call someone who tricks an innocent girl and drags her away from everything she loves? Zeus had no answer for that. They spent 3 weeks on that island, and despite everything they were happy. Zeus couldn't believe it. After that terrible beginning, Europa began to warm up to him. She was still angry, still hurt, but she was also curious. You're not what I expected, she told him one evening as they watched the sunset. What did you expect? A monster, a tyrant, someone cruel and selfish. Zeus flinched. Maybe you were right the first time, maybe, but you're also sad and lonely. And you try so hard to be charming that I think you've forgotten how to be real. Zeus stared at her. You see all that? I see a man who has everything he could want, but nothing he actually needs. Europa was the first person to see through Zeus's charm to the emptiness underneath. And instead of running away, she stayed. They talked for hours every day about everything, about nothing. Zeus told her about the loneliness of being king. Europa told him about the joy of simple things. You know what I miss most, Europa said one day. My morning walks, just me and the flowers and the sound of birds. Zeus created a garden for her, the most beautiful garden in the world. every flower that had ever existed. "It's lovely," Europa said, "but it's not the same." "Why not?" "Because I chose my morning walks. This garden is something you made for me. That's not the same as something I chose for myself." Zeus was starting to understand. Europa didn't want grand gestures. She wanted freedom. She wanted choice. She wanted the right to say no. "I could give you anything," Zeus said desperately. "Immortality, power, jewels, palaces. I don't want any of those things." "Then what do you want?" Europa looked at him with eyes that held oceans. "I want to go home." Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and sometimes those rhythms break our hearts with their honesty. Zeus realized he had two choices. He could keep Europa on the island forever, use his power to make her stay, build a beautiful prison and convince himself she was happy, or he could let her go. Give up the first person who'd ever really seen him, face the loneliness he'd been running from his whole life. Some stories echo through time because they show us what love really means. Zeus chose love, real love, the kind that puts the other person's happiness first. "I'll take you home," he said. Europa's eyes filled with tears. "Really, really, I'm sorry I took you away. I'm sorry I scared you. I'm sorry I built our entire relationship on a lie. Zeus, you deserve someone who asks before taking, someone who values your choices, someone who sees you as more than just a beautiful thing to possess." They sailed back to Europa's homeland together, not as captor and captive, but as two people who'd found something real in the midst of something wrong. When they reached the shore, Europa turned to him. "I don't hate you," she said softly. I think I could have loved you if you'd asked." Zeus felt those words like a knife through his heart. "I know. Maybe in another life, you'll learn to ask first. Maybe." Europa kissed his cheek gently. "Goodbye, Zeus. Try to be better." Zeus watched her walk away, back to her family, back to her life, back to her morning walks in ordinary meadows. He'd had everything he thought he wanted. A beautiful woman who understood him, a perfect romantic setting, weeks of happiness, but he'd built it all on lies and force, and it had turned to ash in his hands. Zeus flew back to Mount Olympus, carrying the weight of what he'd learned. Love wasn't about taking what you wanted, it was about deserving what you hoped for. Europa's story would echo through time. The continent would be named after her. Her descendants would build empires, but Zeus would remember her for something else. She was the first person who'd loved him enough to tell him the truth. He was not a romantic hero. He was not a charming rogue. He was a powerful man who used that power to take what he wanted. Some stories echo through time because they change. Us, Europa, changed. Zeus, not completely, not permanently, but enough to plant a seed of doubt. Maybe there was a better way to love. Maybe he could learn to ask instead of take. Maybe he could become the man Europa had described that first morning. Gentle and kind and patient, the story continues. Let yourself drift peacefully, knowing that even gods can learn from their mistakes if they're brave enough to listen. Leda, the Swan situations, returned to Mount Olympus, carrying Europa's words like stones in his chest. "Try to be better," she'd said. "Learn to ask first." He meant to follow her advice. He really did. For almost 6 months, Zeus focused on being a better king, a better brother, a better ruler. He stopped chasing mortal women. He worked on his relationship with Hera, not romantically, but respectfully. He tried to be the kind of god his people deserved, but Zeus had never been good at celebration, and he'd never been good at being alone. The loneliness crept back in, the restlessness, the need to feel wanted and needed and essential to someone's happiness. That's when he saw Leda. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms. And Zeus's heart beat with the rhythm of a man who kept making the same mistakes. Leda was a queen in her own right, married to a king named Tyndareus. She had everything: power, respect, a loving husband, beautiful children. She was also the most graceful woman Zeus had ever seen. He watched her from the clouds as she walked by a lake near her palace. She moved like water itself, fluid and serene. Her dress floated around her like mist. Zeus told himself he was just admiring her, like looking at a sunset. You can appreciate beauty without interfering with it. But appreciation became fascination. Fascination became obsession. Obsession became the familiar ache of wanting something he couldn't have. Zeus tried to resist. He remembered Europa's tears. He remembered the shame of building love on lies. But Leda was so beautiful, so peaceful. Just one conversation, Zeus told himself, just to meet her. I'll be honest this time. I'll tell her who I am. Some stories echo through time because they show us how we lie to ourselves. Zeus had every intention of being honest. He really did. But as he prepared to approach Leda, he realized a problem. He was Zeus, king of the gods. If he appeared to her as himself, she'd be terrified. She'd probably faint, or run away, or both. I need to be something less intimidating, he thought. Something gentle, something that won't scare her. Zeus looked down at the lake where Leda liked to walk. Swans glided across the water with perfect grace. They were beautiful, elegant, peaceful. A swan, Zeus decided. I'll be a swan, just for a few minutes, just to get close to her. Then I'll reveal myself, gently. Zeus should have remembered that his plans never worked out the way he intended. The transformation was flawless. Zeus became the most magnificent swan in history. Pure white feathers that gleamed like snow. A graceful neck that curved like a question mark. Wings that could carry him across any distance. He landed on the lake just as Leda arrived for her morning walk. Leda saw him and stopped. Oh, she breathed. You're beautiful. Zeus felt that familiar flutter in his chest. Even as a swan, he still craved admiration. Leda sat by the water's edge, watching him glide across the surface. Are you lost, beautiful one? This lake is so small for someone like you. Zeus swam closer, letting her see his elegant form. He was showing off, he knew, but Leda seemed delighted by his presence. You can understand me, can't you? She said softly. I can see it in your eyes. There's something almost human about you. Zeus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the water. She was seeing through his disguise, not completely, but enough to know he wasn't what he seemed. He should have transformed back then, should have revealed himself honestly, should have had the conversation he'd promised himself. Instead, he swam closer. Leda reached out to touch his feathers. You're so soft, she murmured, so gentle. Zeus leaned into her touch, forgetting everything except the warmth of her fingers. It had been so long since someone had touched him with simple affection. I wish I could talk to you, Leda said. I feel so alone sometimes. Even surrounded by people, I feel alone. Zeus understood that feeling better than she could know, but he couldn't tell her that, not while he was pretending to be a swan. Leda began visiting the lake every day. She would sit by the water and talk to Zeus about her life, her marriage, her children, her dreams and fears and secret thoughts. My husband is a good man, she told Zeus one afternoon, but he doesn't really see me. He sees the queen, the wife, the mother, but not me. Zeus felt something twist in his chest. He knew exactly what she meant. People saw the king, the god, the powerful ruler, but who saw Zeus? You see me, Leda said, stroking his neck. Don't you, beautiful one? You see me as I really am. Zeus is falling in love. Not with Leda's beauty, though she was stunning. Not with her grace, though she was elegant. He was falling in love with the woman who talked to a swan like he was her closest friend. Some stories echo through time, because they show us that the deepest connections come from the simplest moments. For 2 weeks, Zeus lived a double life. By day, he was the swan who listened to Leda's secrets. By night, he was the god who dreamed of revealing himself. He kept telling himself he would tell her the truth tomorrow, next week, when the time was right. But the time was never right, and Zeus was enjoying their connection too much to risk losing it. Then came the day when everything changed. Leda arrived at the lake in tears. "Oh, my beautiful friend," she said, collapsing beside the water. "I don't know what to do." Zeus swam to her immediately, concerned. She'd never been this upset before. "My husband wants to arrange a marriage for our daughter," Leda said. "She's only 16, still a child, but he says it's for political reasons." Zeus felt anger flash through him. He'd watched Leda's daughter grow up through her stories. She was bright and curious and full of life. "I tried to argue with him," Leda continued, "but he says it's not my decision, that I don't understand politics, that I should trust him." Zeus wanted to speak, wanted to offer comfort, wanted to tell her she was right to protect her daughter. But he was a swan. He could only listen. "I feel so powerless," Leda whispered. "I'm a queen, but I have no real power. I'm a mother, but we can't protect my own child." Zeus swam closer, pressing his feathered head against her hand. It was the only comfort he could offer. "You understand, don't you?" Leda said, tears falling onto his feathers. "You understand what it feels like to be trapped." Zeus did understand, more than she knew, but he was trapped by his own lies now. That night, Zeus made a decision. He would reveal himself to Leda. He would tell her the truth about who he was. He would offer to help her protect her daughter. He would finally be honest. But when Zeus arrived at the lake the next morning, he found Leda in a very different mood. She was laughing, playing in the shallow water. Her dress was hiked up to her knees. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. "Come play with me, beautiful one," she called to him. "The water is perfect." Zeus swam toward her, confused by her sudden change in mood. Yesterday, she'd been heartbroken. Today, she seemed free. "I made a decision," Leda said, splashing water at him playfully. "I'm going to stop worrying about things I can't control. I'm going to enjoy the beautiful moments." She waded deeper into the lake, laughing as the water swirled around her. Zeus followed, caught up in her joy. "You're the only one who really knows me," Leda said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "The only one who sees me as I really am." Zeus felt the familiar electricity of desire. Leda was so close, so warm, so trusting. He should have transformed back, should have revealed himself, should have had the honest conversation he'd promised. Instead, he let himself be swept away by the moment. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and sometimes those rhythms lead us into territory we can't return from. What happened next was complicated. Zeus was still a swan. Leda was still a mortal woman. But somehow, in that moment, the boundaries between God and mortal, between truth and illusion, between right and wrong, became blurred. Zeus told himself it was magical, romantic, meant to be, but deep down he knew the truth. He was taking advantage of a woman who trusted him. He was using her feelings for the swan to get close to her as a god. He was doing exactly what he'd done to Europa, building intimacy on lies. When it was over, Zeus transformed back to his divine form. He stood in the shallow water, looking down at Leda with a mixture of love and shame. Leda stared at him in shock. I'm Zeus," he said quietly. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. You're sorry. Leda's voice was barely a whisper. I've been talking to you for weeks. I've been telling you my secrets. I've been falling in love with you. I was falling in love with you, too. But you were lying to me. You were pretending to be something you're not. Zeus felt the familiar weight of his poor choices. I wanted to tell you. I tried to find the right time. The right time. The right time was the first day. The right time was before I trusted you. The right time was before I... Leda's voice broke. She looked down at herself, standing in the water, with a god she'd never chosen to meet. What have you done to me? Zeus realized she wasn't just talking about the deception, the children that would come from their union, the way her life would change forever. I can help you, Zeus said desperately. I can protect you. I can make sure you're safe. Safe. Leda laughed bitterly. You think I'm worried about safety? I'm worried about honesty. I'm worried about choice. I'm worried about the fact that I fell in love with a lie. Some stories echo through time because they show us that good intentions don't erase bad actions. Zeus had genuinely fallen in love with Leda. He genuinely wanted to help her. He'd genuinely planned to be honest. But he'd built their entire relationship on deception. And now that deception was poisoning everything beautiful they'd shared. I do love you, Zeus said helplessly. You love the woman who talked to a swan, Leda replied. She was talking to a lie. Zeus watched Leda walk away from him, back to her palace, back to her life, back to consequences she'd never chosen. Months later, Leda would give birth to 4 children, 2 from her husband, 2 from Zeus. One of those children would be Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. But Zeus would remember Leda for something else. She was the second woman who'd shown him that love built on lies always crumbles. He'd done it again. Taken what he wanted without asking. Built connection through deception. Hurt someone he genuinely cared about. Zeus flew back to Mount Olympus, carrying the weight of another lesson he didn't want to learn. Some stories echo through time because they force us to confront the same truths over and over until we finally listen. Zeus was beginning to understand that he couldn't love someone while lying to them. He couldn't build trust while breaking it. He couldn't have real connection while wearing false faces, but understanding and changing were 2 different things. The story continues. Let yourself drift peacefully, knowing that even gods struggle with the gap between who they want to be and who they are. Ganymede, the pretty boy situations, returned to Mount Olympus, carrying Leda's words like thorns in his mind. You love the woman who talked to a swan, but that woman doesn't exist. She was talking to a lie. Love on deception. For the 3rd time, he'd hurt someone he genuinely cared about. For the 3rd time, he'd proven that good intentions meant nothing if your actions were selfish. He meant to learn from this. He really did. To understand what kept going wrong, he talked to his brothers. He consulted oracles. He even tried meditation, though sitting still had never been his strong suit. The answer always came back the same. Zeus was afraid of rejection, afraid that if people saw him as he really was, they might not choose him, playing roles, being whatever he thought people wanted. But understanding a problem and fixing it were completely different things. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and Zeus's heart beat with the rhythm of a man who kept choosing the easy lie over the hard truth. That's when he saw Ganymede. The young man was tending sheep on Mount Ida, completely unaware that he was being watched by the king of the gods. Ganymede was beautiful in a way that made Zeus forget how to breathe. Golden hair that caught sunlight like spun thread. Eyes the color of summer sky. A smile that could have powered the sun. But it wasn't just Ganymede's beauty that caught Zeus's attention. The way he laughed with his sheep like they were old friends, the way he sang while he worked, the way he moved through the world like it was created just for his happiness. Zeus watched from the clouds, telling himself he was just admiring the view, like watching a sunset. You can appreciate beauty without interfering with it, but appreciation became fascination. Fascination became obsession. Obsession became that familiar ache of wanting something he couldn't have. Zeus tried to resist. He remembered Europa's tears. He remembered Leda's betrayal. He remembered the shame of building connection on lies. But Ganymede was so beautiful, so joyful, so completely unaware of divine attention. Just one conversation, Zeus told himself. Just to meet him, I'll be honest this time. I'll tell him who I am from the beginning. Some stories echo through time because they show us how we lie to ourselves with the same words over and over. Zeus had every intention of being honest. He really did. But as he prepared to approach Ganymede, he realized a familiar problem. He was Zeus, king of the gods. If he appeared to the young shepherd as himself, Ganymede would be terrified. He'd probably run away, or faint, or both. I need to be something less intimidating, Zeus thought. Something that won't scare him. Zeus looked down at the mountain where Ganymede tended his flocks. Eagles soared overhead with magnificent grace. They were powerful, beautiful, majestic. An eagle, Zeus decided. I'll be an eagle, just for a few minutes, just to get close to him. Then I'll reveal myself gently. Zeus should have remembered that his plans never worked out the way he intended. He should have remembered that every time he told himself, just for a few minutes, those minutes stretched into something much longer. The transformation was flawless. Zeus became the most magnificent eagle in history. Golden feathers that gleamed like metal, wings that could carry him across any distance, eyes that could see for miles. He landed on a rock near where Ganymede was working. Ganymede saw him and we stopped. Well, hello there, beautiful, he said softly. You're far from home, aren't you? Zeus felt that familiar flutter in his chest. Even as an eagle, he still craved admiration. Ganymede approached slowly, respectfully. You're not afraid of me, he observed. Most wild eagles keep their distance from humans. Zeus tilted his head, studying the young man. Ganymede had gentle hands and a patient voice. He talked to animals like they were people. He talked to Zeus like he mattered. Are you hungry? Ganymede asked, pulling bread from his pack. I don't have much. Zeus felt something twist in his chest. When was the last time someone had offered him food without expecting something in return? When was the last time someone had been kind to him without knowing who he was? Ganymede broke the bread into small pieces, placing them on the rock. There you go. Take what you need. Zeus ate the bread, tasting kindness in every crumb. Ganymede sat nearby, not trying to touch him or capture him or control him, just sharing space peacefully. I wish I could fly like you, Ganymede said, looking up at the sky. It must be amazing to see the world from above, to go anywhere you want. Zeus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Ganymede was talking about freedom, about choice, about the very things Zeus kept taking away from people. I bet you've seen incredible things, Ganymede continued. Beautiful places, amazing sights. I've never been anywhere but this mountain. Zeus wanted to speak, wanted to tell Ganymede about the wonders of the world, wanted to offer to show him everything he'd ever dreamed of seeing. But he was an eagle. He could only listen. For 3 days, Zeus returned to the mountain. He would perch on his rock and watch Ganymede work. The young man would share his lunch and talk about his dreams. I love my sheep, Ganymede said on the 3rd day. But sometimes I wonder what else is out there. what other lives I might live. Zeus felt something dangerous stirring in his chest. Not just fascination, though the young man was captivating. Zeus felt the urge to grant wishes, to make dreams come true, to be someone's hero. If you could have anything, Ganymede said, scratching behind Zeus's feathers, what would you choose? Zeus knew the answer immediately. He would choose to be seen, to be loved for who he really was, to have someone choose him honestly. But he was an eagle. He couldn't answer. That night, Zeus made a decision. He would tell the truth about who he was. He would offer to show the young man the world, but only if Ganymede chose to come willingly. He would finally be honest. But when Zeus arrived at the mountain the next morning, he found Ganymede in tears. "Oh, my beautiful friend," Ganymede said, seeing the eagle land. "I don't know what to do." Zeus moved closer, concerned. Ganymede had never been upset before. "My father wants to send me to the city," Ganymede explained, "that I need to find a wife and start a family." Zeus felt anger flash through him. He'd watched Ganymede find joy in simple things. The young man wasn't ready for marriage. He was barely more than a boy. "I don't want to get married," Ganymede continued. "I don't want to become someone I'm not." Zeus wanted to speak, wanted to offer comfort, wanted to tell Ganymede he had choices, but he was an eagle. He could only listen. "I wish I could just disappear," Ganymede whispered. "I wish I could fly away like you." Him, Ganymede, wanted to fly, wanted to escape, wanted to be free. Zeus could give him that. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms. And sometimes, those rhythms lead us into territory we can't return from. Zeus made a decision that felt like heroism, but was actually kidnapping. He would take Ganymede to Olympus. He would show him the world. Ever dreamed of he would save him. But Zeus forgot to ask if Ganymede wanted to be saved. In one swift motion, Zeus grabbed Ganymede in his talons and lifted him into the sky. The young man screamed, terrified and confused, his sheep scattered in panic. "It's okay," Zeus tried to project thoughts to him. "I'm helping you. I'm giving you what you wanted." But Ganymede couldn't hear his thoughts. All he knew was that he was being carried away from everything he'd ever known by a giant eagle. Zeus flew him to Mount Olympus, transforming back to his divine form once they were. Safe in his palace, Ganymede collapsed on the marble floor, shaking and terrified. He looked up at Zeus, with eyes full of shock and betrayal. I'm Zeus," he said gently. "I'm sorry I scared you. I was trying to help." "Help," Ganymede's voice cracked. "You kidnapped me. I rescued you. You said you wanted to fly away. You said you wanted to disappear. I was upset. I didn't mean it, literally." Zeus felt the familiar weight of his poor choices. "I can give you everything you've ever dreamed of. You'll never have to worry about marriage or family expectations. You'll be free. I'm a prisoner. You took me away from my home, my family, my sheep." Zeus realized he'd done it again. He'd taken what he wanted without asking. He'd made assumptions about what someone else needed. "I can send you back," Zeus said desperately. "If you really want to go, of course I want to go back." But Zeus hesitated. Ganymede was so beautiful, so perfect, so exactly what Zeus had been searching for. "What if I made you immortal?" Zeus offered. "What if I made you a god? You'd never have to worry about aging or dying. You'd have power beyond imagination." "I don't want power. I want my sheep." Some stories echo through time because they show us that good intentions don't erase bad actions. Zeus had genuinely wanted to help Ganymede. He'd genuinely wanted to give him freedom. He'd genuinely believed. He was being heroic, but he'd built his heroism on kidnapping. And now that kidnapping was poisoning everything he'd meant to accomplish. "I love you," Zeus said helplessly. "You love the idea of me," Ganymede replied, "but you don't know me. You never asked what I actually wanted." Zeus spent weeks trying to convince Ganymede to stay. He showed him the wonders of Olympus. He introduced him to the other gods. He gave him beautiful clothes and delicious food and immortal wine. But Ganymede remained heartbroken. He missed his mountain. He missed his sheep. He missed his simple life. "I would have chosen you," Ganymede said one evening, staring out at the stars, "if you'd asked me honestly, if you'd given me time to think, if you'd let me choose." Zeus felt something crack inside his chest. "Maybe I was attracted to you, even as an eagle. I felt connected to you, but you took that choice away from me." Zeus began to understand that love required more than good intentions. It required respect. It required patience. It required letting people choose freely, even if they might choose to leave. Eventually, Zeus did give Ganymede a choice. He could return to his mountain, or he could stay on Olympus as the cupbearer to the gods. Immortal, honored, but never quite free. Ganymede, which chose to stay. Not because he loved Zeus, but because he couldn't go back to his old life, knowing what he'd lost. He became the constellation Aquarius, pouring water for the gods for eternity. Zeus had gotten what he wanted. A beautiful companion. Someone to serve him wine and remind him of his power. But he'd lost what he'd been searching for. Love, connection, someone who chose him freely. Some stories echo through time because they force us to confront the same truths over and over until we finally listen. Zeus was beginning to understand that you can't love someone while controlling them. You can't build connection while taking away choices. You can't have real intimacy while playing God with someone's life. But understanding and changing were two different things. The story continues. Let yourself drift peacefully, knowing that even gods struggle with the difference between love and possession. Callisto, the bare consequences Zeus, sat in his palace, watching Ganymede pour wine for the other gods. The young man was beautiful, immortal, and technically willing to serve, but his eyes held the sadness of someone who'd been given everything, except the one thing he'd actually wanted: choice. This should have been enough to teach Zeus about consent, about respect, about the difference between love and control. But Zeus had never been good at learning from his mistakes. He was good at understanding them, analyzing them, even feeling guilty about them, but changing his behavior. That was a different challenge entirely. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and Zeus's heart beat with the rhythm of a man who kept thinking the next time would be different. That's when he saw Callisto. She was one of Artemis's huntresses, sworn to a life of chastity and service to the goddess of the hunt. Callisto was fierce, independent, and completely devoted to her chosen path. She could track a deer through dense forest, shoot an arrow with perfect accuracy, and survive alone in the wilderness for months. She was also beautiful in a way that made Zeus forget every lesson he'd supposedly learned. Zeus watched her from the clouds as she led a hunting party through the forest. She moved like a wild animal herself, silent and graceful. Her hair was dark as night, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She commanded respect from both her fellow hunters and the creatures of the forest. But it wasn't just Callisto's beauty or skill that caught Zeus's attention. It was her certainty. She knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. She'd made her choice and stuck to it, no matter what pressures or temptations came her way. Zeus found that certainty incredibly attractive. Here was someone who couldn't be swayed by gifts or promises or flattery. Someone who had built her entire identity around saying no to exactly what Zeus represented. Just one conversation, Zeus told himself. Just to meet her, I'll be honest this time. I'll tell her who I am from the beginning. Some stories echo through time because they show us how we use the same excuses to justify increasingly terrible decisions. Zaz had every intention of being honest. He really did. But as he prepared to approach Callisto, he realized a familiar problem. He was Zeus, king of the gods, and everything Callisto had sworn to avoid. If he appeared to her as himself, she wouldn't just be terrified. She'd be disgusted. She'd probably try to shoot him with her arrows. I need to be someone she trusts, Zeus thought. Someone she wouldn't be afraid of. Zeus looked down at the forest where Callisto hunted. She was surrounded by her fellow huntresses, all devoted to Artemis. They trusted each other completely. They would follow their leader anywhere. Artemis, Zeus decided, I'll be Artemis, just for a few minutes, just to get close to her. Then, I'll reveal myself gently. Zeus should have realized that impersonating his own daughter to seduce her follower was a new low, even for him. The transformation was flawless. Zeus became a perfect copy of Artemis. Silver hair that gleamed like moonlight, eyes that held the wisdom of the hunt, a voice that commanded instant respect and obedience. He found Callisto practicing her archery alone in a clearing. Callisto, Zeus said, using Artemis's voice. I've been looking for you. Callisto immediately dropped to one knee. My lady, I am honored by your presence. Zeus felt that familiar flutter in his chest, but this time it was mixed with something darker. Callisto's devotion was real. Her respect, what's genuine? Rise, Zeus said gently. Walk with me. They walked together through the forest, Callisto hanging on every word that came from her goddess's mouth. Zeus found himself genuinely enjoying her company. She was intelligent, funny. I've been watching you, Zeus said. You've become my finest huntress. I live to serve you, my lady. Tell me about your life, your dreams, your fears. Callisto opened up in ways she never would have to anyone else. She talked about her childhood, her calling to the hunt, her joy in the wild spaces of the world. She talked about her sisters in the hunt, her commitment to chastity, her absolute devotion to Artemis. I've never regretted my choice, Callisto said. Some women find happiness in marriage and children, but I found happiness in freedom, in wildness, in serving something greater than myself. Zeus felt something twist in his chest. Callisto wasn't, which just committed to chastity because it was expected of her. She had chosen it because it gave her life meaning. It was central to who she was. Have you ever wondered what you might be missing? Zeus asked. No, my lady. I've seen what marriage is to women, how it diminishes them. I chose the wild instead, and I've never looked back. Zeus should have respected that choice, should have transformed back and walked away, should have left Callisto to her chosen life. Instead, he felt challenged by her certainty. Here was someone who had built walls specifically to keep him out, someone who had sworn to avoid everything he represented. Zeus had always been attracted to what he couldn't have. You're so certain, Zeus said, so sure of your path I am, my lady. It's the source of my strength. But surely you felt desires, temptations. Callisto looked uncomfortable. Of course, my lady, I'm human, but I've learned to channel those feelings into my devotion to you. Zeus felt something dangerous stirring in his chest. Not just desire, though Callisto was beautiful. Not just fascination, though she was captivating. Zeus felt the urge to test her devotion, to see if her certainty was really as strong as she claimed. What if I asked you to do something that went against your vows? Zeus said. I would trust that you had good reasons, my lady, even if it meant breaking your oath of chastity. Callisto stopped walking. My lady, I don't understand. Zeus should have stopped then. should have revealed himself, should have been honest about who he was and what he wanted. Instead, he stepped closer. I'm asking you to trust me. I do trust you, my lady. But what you're suggesting, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm commanding it. Zeus used Artemis's voice to speak words that Artemis would never say. He used her authority to demand something that went against everything she stood for. Callisto was trapped. She couldn't disobey her goddess, but she couldn't understand why Artemis would ask her to break her most sacred vow. My lady, please, this isn't like you. This isn't who you are. You don't know who I am, Zeus said, and for the first time he was telling the truth. What happened next was rape. There's no gentler word for it. Zeus used his daughter's form to assault her most devoted follower. He used Callisto's trust against her. He used her devotion as a weapon. When it was over, Zeus transformed back to his divine form. He stood in the clearing, looking down at Callisto with a mixture of satisfaction and shame. Callisto stared at him in absolute horror. I'm Zeus, he said, as if that explained everything. You were Artemis. You were my goddess. You used her voice, her face, her authority. I had to. You never would have chosen me otherwise. Of course, I wouldn't have chosen you. I swore an oath. I made a commitment. I built my entire life around avoiding exactly this. Zeus felt the familiar weight of his poor choices. I can make this right. I can give you anything you want. Power, immortality, beauty beyond imagination. I want my oath back, Callisto said. I want my purity back. I want my goddess to trust me again. She doesn't have to know. She's going to know. Do you think I can hide this from her? Do you think she won't sense what you've done? Zeus realized. He'd created an impossible situation. Callisto couldn't hide what had happened, but she also couldn't explain it without revealing Zeus's deception. I'll protect you, Zeus said desperately. I'll make sure she doesn't punish you. Punish me. Callisto laughed bitterly. You think this is about punishment? This is about betrayal. I trusted you. I trusted the form you wore. I trusted the voice you used. Some stories echo through time because they show us that some violations can't be fixed with apologies or gifts. Zeus had genuinely believed he could make things right. He'd genuinely thought Callisto would understand eventually. He'd genuinely convinced himself that breaking someone's most sacred vow was somehow an act of love. But he'd built his love on deception, assault, and betrayal. And now that betrayal was poisoning everything he'd meant to accomplish. Months passed. Callisto tried to return to her life as a huntress, but everything had changed. She was pregnant with Zeus's child. She was no longer pure. She was no longer worthy of Artemis's service. When Artemis discovered the truth, she was furious. Not at Zeus, who was beyond her reach, but at Callisto, who had broken her vow. You swore an oath, Artemis said coldly. You promised to remain chaste. I was deceived, Callisto said desperately. He used your form, your voice. I thought I was obeying you. You should have known better. You should have resisted. How could I resist my own goddess? But Artemis was too angry to listen to reason. She transformed Callisto into a bear, condemning her to live as a wild animal for the rest of her days. Zeus watched from Mount Olympus as Callisto struggled to survive in her new form. She was no longer human, but she still retained her human mind. She remembered her life as a huntress. She remembered her devotion to Artemis. She remembered the assault that had destroyed everything she'd built. Zeus felt guilty, but not guilty enough to reverse what had happened. He told himself that Callisto was alive, that she was free in her own way, that maybe she would find happiness in her new form. But deep down, Zeus knew the truth. He had destroyed someone's life because he couldn't accept that she didn't want. He had used deception and assault to get what he wanted. He had turned his own daughter against her most devoted follower. Years later, Zeus would place Callisto in the stars as the constellation Ursa Major. People would call it an honor, a reward for her suffering. But Zeus knew it was really an apology, a way of saying sorry that came too late to matter. Some stories echo through time because they force us to confront the same truths over and over until we finally listen. Zeus was beginning to understand that desire didn't justify deception, that wanting someone didn't give him the right to take them, that love required respect especially when someone said no. But understanding and changing were two different things. The story continues. Let yourself drift peacefully, knowing that even gods must eventually face the consequences of their choices. Dano, the golden shower incident. Zeus stood in his palace, watching the constellation Ursa Major wheel across the night sky. Somewhere in those stars was Callisto, transformed beyond recognition, bearing the weight of his choices for eternity. This should have been the moment Zeus finally understood, the moment he realized that his pattern of deception and assault was destroying not just his victims, but pieces of his own soul. But Zeus had never been good at sitting with uncomfortable truths. He was good at recognizing them, even feeling guilty about them, but actually changing his behavior. That required a kind of courage Zeus had never developed. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and Zeus's heart beat with the rhythm of a man who kept thinking the next time would be different, even as he repeated the same mistakes over and over. That's when he heard about Dano. The story came to him through the usual divine gossip network. King Acrisius of Argos had received a prophecy that his daughter would bear a son who would kill him. The king's solution was both simple and terrible. He locked Dano in a bronze tower, ensuring she would never meet a man, never fall in love, and never bear the prophesied child. Zeus should have been horrified by this story. A father imprisoning his own daughter to avoid his fate was exactly the kind of abuse of power that Zeus claimed to oppose. Instead, Zeus found himself fascinated by the challenge. Here was a woman who was literally unreachable, locked away from all mortal men, protected by bronze walls and her father's paranoia. Zeus told himself he was concerned about Danae's well-being. Locked in a tower, she must be lonely, desperate, in need of rescue. But deep down, Zeus knew the truth. He wasn't interested in Danae's well-being. He was interested in the impossibility of reaching her, the ultimate test of his power and creativity. Just one visit. I'll be honest this time. I'll tell her who I am from the beginning. Some stories echo through time because they show us how we use noble intentions to justify ignoble desires. Zeus had every intention of being honest. He really did. But as he prepared to approach Dano, he realized a familiar problem. She was locked in a bronze tower with no doors and only a small window at the top. Even if Zeus appeared to her as himself, she would assume he was a hallucination. The isolation had probably affected her mind. I need to be something she can't dismiss, Zeus thought. Something that proves I'm real. Zeus looked down at the tower where Dano was imprisoned. The only things that could reach her were sunlight, rain, and wind. Rain, Zeus decided. I'll be rain. Golden rain, so she knows it's divine. Just for a few minutes, just to get her attention. Then I'll reveal myself gently. Zeus should have realized that becoming weather to seduce a woman was a new level of violation even for him. The transformation was unlike anything Zeus had ever attempted. Instead of taking animal form, he became pure energy, golden light that fell like rain through Danae's window. warm droplets that touched her skin like liquid. Sunlight. Dano was sleeping when the golden rain began to fall. She woke to find her small room filled with impossible light, warm drops that fell upward as often as down, light that touched her skin and made her feel things she'd never experienced. "What is this?" she whispered, reaching out to catch the golden drops. Zeus felt that familiar flutter in his chest, but magnified beyond anything he'd experienced. He wasn't just watching Dano, he was touching her, surrounding her, becoming part of her environment. Dano stood in the golden rain, letting it wash over her. She'd been alone for so long that any contact, even strange contact, felt like a gift. "Are you real?" she asked the light. "Or am I finally losing my mind?" Zeus wanted to answer, but he was rain, he was light, he was weather. He could only touch and surround and warm. Dano began to laugh. Not the laughter of madness, but the laughter of wonder. "You're beautiful," she said to the light. "Whatever you are, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Zeus felt something dangerous stirring in his chest. Not just desire, though Dano was beautiful. Not just fascination, though she was captivating. Zeus felt the urge to be everything to her, her only companion, her only source of warmth and light and contact. "I've been so lonely," Dano said, dancing in the golden rain. "So cold, so afraid, but you make me feel alive." Zeus realized he had found the perfect victim, someone so isolated, so desperate for contact, that she would welcome any attention, even attention from weather. What happened next was rape committed by a force of nature. Zeus used his elemental form to violate Dano in ways that defied description. He was everywhere at once, touching, penetrating, overwhelming. She couldn't resist him because he wasn't solid. She couldn't escape him because he filled the entire space. When it was over, Zeus transformed back to his divine form. He stood in the small room, looking down at Dano with a mixture of satisfaction and shame. Dano stared at him in absolute shock. I'm Zeus," he said, as if that explained everything. "You were the rain, you were the light, you were inside me. I had to find a way to reach you. Your father locked you away from all mortal men. He locked me away from everyone. That was the point." Zeus felt the familiar weight of his poor choices. "I can get you out of here. I can give you freedom, power, anything you want. I want to understand what just happened to me," Dano said. "I want to know why you thought you had the right to become weather, and I was helping you. You were lonely. You said so yourself. I was lonely for human contact, for conversation, for companionship, not for whatever that was." Zeus realized he'd created another impossible situation. Dano was going to be pregnant with his child in a bronze tower, with no way to explain what had happened. "Your father will kill you when he finds out," Zeus said. "That's not your problem to solve. That wasn't your choice to make. I'll protect you. I'll make sure you and the child are safe. The child, Danny's." The voice was barely a whisper. "There's going to be a child, Perseus. He'll be a great hero. You should be honored. I'm going to give birth to a demigod in a bronze tower because a god decided to rape me as weather. Where's the honor in that?" Some stories echo through time because they show us that. Some violations are so complete they reshape reality itself. Zeus had genuinely believed he was rescuing Dano. He genuinely thought she would be grateful for his attention. He genuinely convinced himself that becoming weather to assault an imprisoned woman was somehow an act of mercy. But he'd built his mercy on the complete violation of someone's bodily autonomy. And now that violation was going to have consequences that would ripple through generations. Months passed, Danae's pregnancy couldn't be hidden. When King Acrisius discovered that his daughter had somehow conceived a child in her locked tower, he was furious and terrified. "This is impossible," he raged. "No man could have reached you." "No man did," Dano said quietly. "It was Zeus. He came as golden rain." "You're lying. You're protecting someone. You've somehow been with a man. I haven't seen another human being in 3 years. How could I have been with a man?" But Acrisius couldn't accept the truth. It was too strange, too impossible. So he convinced himself that Dano was lying to protect a lover. His solution was both creative and cruel. He locked Dano and her newborn son Perseus in a wooden chest and threw them into the sea. If they survived, it would prove their innocence. If they died, it would solve his problem. Zeus watched from Mount Olympus as the chest bobbed on the waves. His lover and son were going to drown because of choices he'd made. "I should save them," Zeus thought. "I should calm the seas. I should make sure they reach safety." But Zeus was afraid of being seen as weak, afraid of admitting that his actions had consequences, afraid of taking responsibility for the chaos he'd created. Instead, he did the minimum. He guided the chest to the island of Seriphos, where it washed ashore near a fisherman named Dictys. Dictys found Dano and Perseus, took them in, and raised them as his own family. Perseus would grow up to become a great hero, just as Zeus had predicted. He would slay Medusa, rescue Andromeda, and eventually fulfill the prophecy by accidentally killing his grandfather, Acrisius. But Zeus would always remember Dano for something else. She was the woman who had shown him that he could commit rape even without taking physical form, that he could violate someone's boundaries even as weather, that his power was so complete he could harm people in ways that defied description. Zeus had become whether to assault an imprisoned woman. He had used her desperation against her. He had created a child who would grow up fatherless, and a woman who would spend her life trying to explain an impossible violation. "I saved her," Zeus told himself. "I gave her a son. I got her out of that tower eventually." But deep down, Zeus knew the truth. He had found new ways to take what he wanted without asking. He had pushed the boundaries of violation beyond anything he'd done before. Some stories echo through time because they force us to confront the same truths over and over until we finally listen. Zeus was beginning to understand that power without restraint was indistinguishable from evil, that wanting someone didn't give him the right to become weather and assault them, that love required respect, even when, especially when, someone was too isolated to resist. But understanding and changing were two different things. The story continues. Let yourself drift peacefully, knowing that even gods must eventually face the consequences of their choices. The demigod disaster children Zeus sat in his palace, watching the mortal world through the clouds. Somewhere down there, Perseus was growing up, the son he'd created by assaulting Dano as golden rain, the boy who would become a hero despite having a father who'd abandoned him before birth. Perseus wasn't Zeus's first child. Over the centuries, Zeus had fathered dozens of demigods through his various affairs, deceptions, and assaults, each one powerful, each one talented, each one carrying the weight of having a divine father who was never quite present. Zeus told himself he was proud of his children. Look at what they'd accomplished. Hercules with his legendary strength, Perseus with his heroic deeds, Dionysus with his divine wine. They were proof that his bloodline was exceptional. But Zeus had never been good at examining his own motivations. He was good at celebrating outcomes while ignoring the process that created them. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and Zeus's heart beat with the rhythm of a man who confused creating children with being a father. The truth was simpler and more painful than Zeus wanted to admit. He had created dozens of demigods, but he had never actually parented a single one. Hercules was the perfect example. Born to Alcmene, a mortal woman Zeus had seduced by impersonating her husband. Hercules inherited Zeus's incredible strength and divine nature, but he also inherited Zeus's complete absence from his life. When Hercules was still a baby, Hera had sent serpents to kill him. Zeus could have intervened, could have protected his son, could have stood up to his wife and demanded that she leave the child alone. Instead, Zeus watched from Mount Olympus as his infant son strangled the serpents with his bare hands. "Look at that," Zeus said proudly. "He's already showing his divine heritage." It never occurred to Zeus that maybe his son shouldn't have to fight for his life as a baby, that maybe having a divine father should have meant protection, not just power. As Heracles grew older, the pattern continued. Hera tormented him with madness, causing him to kill his own wife and children in a fit of rage. Zeus could have intervened, could have protected his son's mind, could have stood up to his wife and demanded that she stop. Instead, Zeus watched as Heracles was sentenced to perform 12 impossible labors as penance. "He'll become stronger because of this," Zeus rationalized. "Adversity builds character." It never occurred to Zeus that maybe his son shouldn't have to become the strongest man in the world just to earn his father's attention. Perseus faced similar abandonment. Raised by a fisherman on a remote island, he grew up not knowing his true father. When he was old enough to be useful, various kings and heroes would challenge him to impossible tasks. "Bring me the head of Medusa," King Polydex commanded, hoping to get rid of Perseus so he could marry Dano. Perseus should have died attempting this task. The Gorgon was deadly to look upon, but Zeus finally intervened, sending divine gifts through other gods: a mirrored shield from Athena, winged sandals from Hermes, a helmet of invisibility from Hades. "See," Zeus told himself, "I'm helping him. I'm giving him what he needs to succeed." But Zeus never appeared to Perseus directly, never said, "Son, I'm proud of you," never explained why he'd assaulted Perseus's mother as Golden Rain, never took responsibility for the chaos he'd created. Perseus succeeded in his quest, but he did it believing he was an abandoned bastard who had to prove himself worthy of divine attention. Dionysus had perhaps the strangest origin story of all. Born to Semele, a mortal woman Zeus had seduced with promises of seeing him in his true form. When Hera tricked Semele into asking Zeus to appear as he really was, the divine lightning killed her instantly. Zeus could have let his unborn son die with his mother. Instead, he cut the baby from Semele's womb and sewed him into his own thigh, where Dionysus gestated until he was ready to be born. "I saved him," Zeus told himself. "I carried him in my own body. I gave him life." But Zeus never told Dionysus the truth about his mother's death, never explained that Semele had died because of Zeus's inability to resist showing off, never took responsibility for the fact that his son was born from trauma and divine negligence. Dionysus grew up wild and chaotic, the god of wine and madness. He brought ecstasy and destruction wherever he went. People called him the twice-born god, celebrating his unique origins. But Zeus saw the truth in his son's eyes. Dionysus was searching for something, some sense of belonging, some understanding of why he was the way he was. "He's just naturally rebellious," Zeus rationalized. "Divine children are always difficult." It never occurred to Zeus that maybe his son was acting out, because he'd been abandoned by his father and orphaned by his father's poor choices. The pattern repeated with every demigod child Zeus created. Incredible power, absent father, traumatic childhood, heroic achievements built on the foundation of divine neglect. Zeus would watch his children from Mount Olympus, feeling proud when they succeeded and frustrated when they failed. He would send occasional gifts, divine weapons, helpful prophecies, convenient interventions, but he never sent the thing his children actually needed. Himself, some stories echo through time, because they show us that creating children and raising them are completely different responsibilities. Zeus had confused having sex with being a father. He had confused giving power with giving love. He had confused sending gifts with being present. His children grew up powerful but empty, strong but searching, heroic but haunted by the absence of the one person who should have been there for them. "I'm busy," Zeus would tell himself when he felt guilty about neglecting his children. "I'm running the universe. I don't have time for mortal concerns." But Zeus had time for seducing new women, time for elaborate deceptions, time for transforming into animals and weather and impersonating other gods. He just didn't have time for the children. Those activities created. The truth was simpler and more painful than Zeus wanted to admit. He enjoyed the process of creating children, the chase, the conquest, the satisfaction of getting what he wanted. But he had no interest in the actual work of being a father. Fatherhood required consistency, presence, putting someone else's needs before your own desires. It required showing up even when it wasn't convenient. It required admitting mistakes and doing better. Zeus had never been good at any of those things. Instead, he created a generation of demigods who were incredibly powerful and incredibly damaged. They saved the world repeatedly, but they couldn't save themselves from the abandonment that had shaped their lives. Hercules died in agony, poisoned by his wife's jealousy and his own rage. Perseus lived as a king, but died believing he was fundamentally unlovable. Dionysus spent eternity trying to fill the void left by his father's absence with wine and madness. Zeus's children became legends, but they never became happy. The other gods noticed the pattern. "Your children are all traumatized," Athena observed one day. "They're powerful, but they're not whole. They're heroes," Zeus replied. "Heroes are supposed to struggle. It makes them stronger." "They're struggling because their father abandoned them," Athena said. "Not because heroism requires trauma. I didn't abandon them. I gave them divine blood. I gave them incredible abilities. I gave them everything they needed to succeed. You gave them everything except a father." Zeus felt something twist in his chest. "I can't be involved in mortal lives. I'm a god. I have responsibilities. You have responsibilities to your children too. They turned out fine. Look at what they accomplished. They turned out broken. Look at how they suffered." Some stories echo through time because they force us to confront the same truths over and over until we finally listen. Zeus was beginning to understand that power without presence was worthless, that creating children without raising them was just another form of abandonment, that love required showing up, even when it was difficult. But understanding and changing were two different things. Zeus continued to create children he would never truly father, continued to confuse genetic legacy with actual parenting, continued to believe that sending gifts was the same as being present. His children continued to grow up powerful and empty, continued to achieve great things while searching for the one thing their father had never given them: his time, his attention, his love. The cycle continued, generation after generation. divine children raised by mortals, searching for a father who was always too busy being a god to be a parent. Zeus told himself this was just the way things worked. Gods weren't meant to be involved in mortal lives. Divine children were supposed to be independent, but deep down, Zeus knew the truth. He had created an army of heroes who were all searching for the same thing, a father who would choose them over his own desires, and that father was sitting on Mount Olympus, watching his children save the world while refusing to save them from the abandonment. Let yourself drift peacefully, knowing that even gods must eventually face the consequences of their choices, especially the ones that hurt the people they claim to love. The demigod disaster children Zeus sat in his palace, watching the mortal world through the clouds. Somewhere down there, Perseus was growing up, the son he'd created by assaulting Dino as golden rain. The boy who would become a hero despite each one talented. Hercules with his legendary strength, Perseus with his heroic deeds, Dionysus with his divine wine. They were proof that his bloodline was exceptional, but Zeus had never been good at examining his own motivations. He was good at celebrating outcomes while ignoring the process that created them. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and Zeus's heart beat with the rhythm of a man who confused creating children with being a father. The truth was simpler and more painful than Zeus wanted to admit. He had created dozens of demigods, but he had never actually parented a single one. Hercules was the perfect example. Born to Alcmene, a mortal woman Zeus had seduced by impersonating her husband. Heracles inherited Zeus's incredible strength and divine nature, but he also inherited Zeus's complete absence from his life. When Heracles was still a baby, Hera had sent serpents to kill him. Zeus could have intervened, could have protected his son, could have stood up to his wife and demanded that she leave the child alone. Instead, Zeus watched from Mount Olympus as his infant son strangled the serpents with his bare hands. Look at that. That maybe having a divine father should have meant protection, not just power. As Heracles grew older, the pattern continued. Hera tormented him with madness, causing him to kill his own wife and children in a fit of rage. Zeus could have intervened, could have protected his son's mind, could have stood up to his wife and demanded that she stop. Instead, Zeus watched as Heracles was sentenced to perform 12 impossible labors as penance. He'll become stronger because of this. Zeus rationalized, adversity builds character. It never occurred to Zeus that maybe his son shouldn't have to become the strongest man in the world just to earn his father's attention. Perseus faced similar abandonment. Raised by a fisherman on a remote island, he grew up not knowing his true father. When he was old enough to be useful, various kings and heroes would challenge him to impossible tasks. "Bring me the head of Medusa," King Polydex commanded. Hoping to get rid of Perseus so he could marry Dano, Perseus should have died attempting this task. The Gorgon was deadly to look upon, but Zeus finally intervened, sending divine gifts through other gods. A mirrored shield from Athena, winged sandals from Hermes, a helmet of invisibility from Hades. "See," Zeus told himself, "I'm helping him. I'm giving him what he needs to succeed." But Zeus never appeared to Perseus directly, never said, "Son, I'm proud of you." Never explained why he'd assaulted Perseus's mother as golden rain. Never took responsibility for the chaos he'd created. Perseus succeeded in his quest, but he did it believing he was an abandoned bastard who had to prove himself worthy of divine attention. Dionysus had perhaps the strangest origin story of all. Born to Semele, a mortal woman Zeus had seduced with promises of seeing him in his true form. When Hera tricked Semele into asking Zeus to appear as he really was, the divine lightning killed her instantly. Zeus could have let his unborn son die with his mother. Instead, he cut the baby from Semele's womb and sewed him into his own thigh, where Dionysus gestated until he was ready to be born. I saved him, Zeus told himself. I carried him in my own body. I gave him life. But Zeus never told Dionysus the truth about his mother's death. Never explained that Semele had died because of Zeus's inability. Never took responsibility for the fact that his son was born from trauma and divine negligence. Dionysus grew up wild and chaotic, the god of wine and madness. He brought ecstasy and destruction wherever he went. People called him the twice-born god, celebrating his unique origins. But Zeus saw the truth in his son's eyes. Dionysus was searching for something, some sense of belonging, some understanding of why he was the way he was. He's just naturally rebellious, Zeus rationalized. Divine children are always difficult. It never occurred to Zeus that maybe his son was acting out because he'd been abandoned by his father and orphaned by his father's poor choices. The pattern repeated with every demigod child Zeus created. Incredible power, absent father, traumatic childhood, heroic achievements built on the foundation of divine neglect. Zeus would watch his children from Mount Olympus, feeling proud when they succeeded and frustrated when they failed. He would send occasional gifts, divine weapons, helpful prophecies, convenient interventions, but he never sent the thing his children actually needed, himself. Some stories echo through time, because they show us that creating children and raising them are completely different responsibilities. Zeus had confused having sex with being a father. He had confused giving power with giving love. He had confused sending gifts with being present. His children grew up powerful but empty, strong but searching, heroic but haunted by the absence of the one person who should have been there for them. I'm busy, Zeus would tell himself, when he felt guilty about neglecting his children. I'm running the universe. I don't have time, mortal concerns. But Zeus had time for seducing new women, time for transforming into. Those activities created the truth was simpler and more painful than Zeus wanted to admit. He enjoyed the process of creating children, the chase, the conquest, the satisfaction of getting what he wanted. But he had no interest in the actual work of being a father. Fatherhood required consistency, presence, putting someone else's needs before your own desires. It required showing up even when it wasn't convenient. It required admitting mistakes and doing better. Zeus had never been good at any of those things. Instead, he created a generation of demigods who were incredibly powerful and incredibly damaged. They saved the world repeatedly. Perseus lived as a king, but died believing he was fundamentally unlovable. Your children are all traumatized, Athena observed one day. They're powerful, but they're not whole. They're heroes, Zeus replied. Heroes are supposed to struggle. It makes them stronger. They're struggling because their father abandoned them, Athena said. Not because heroism requires trauma. I didn't abandon them. I gave them divine blood. I gave them incredible abilities. I gave them everything they needed to succeed. You gave them everything except a father. Zeus felt something twist in his chest. I can't be involved in mortal lives. I'm a god. You have responsibilities to your children too. They turned out fine. Look at what they accomplished. They turned out broken. Look at how they suffered. Some stories echo through time because they force us to confront the same truths over and over until we finally listen. Zeus was beginning to understand that power without presence was worthless, that creating children without raising them was just another form of abandonment, even when it was difficult. But understanding and changing were two different things. Zeus continued to create children he would never truly father, continued to confuse genetic legacy with actual parenting, continued to believe that sending gifts was the same as being present. His children continued to grow up powerful and empty, continued to achieve great things while searching for the one thing their father had never given them: his time, his attention, his love. The cycle continued, generation after generation. Divine children raised by mortals, searching for a father who was always too busy being a god to be a parent. Zeus told himself this was just the way things worked. Gods weren't meant to be involved in mortal lives. Divine children were supposed to be independent, but deep down, Zeus knew the truth. He had created an army of heroes who were all searching for the same thing, a father who would choose them over his own desires, and that father was sitting on Mount Olympus, watching his children save the world while refusing to save them from the abandonment that had shaped their lives. The story continues. Let yourself drift peacefully, knowing that even gods must eventually face the consequences of their choices, especially the ones that hurt the people they claim to love. The eternal mess. For the first time in his immortal existence, Zeus felt truly alone. Not the dramatic loneliness of a king who couldn't find entertainment, not the self-pity of a god who felt misunderstood. Real loneliness. The kind that comes from finally understanding that you've pushed away everyone who might have loved you. Zeus had spent centuries convinced that he was the hero of his own story, the powerful king who took what he wanted, the divine father who created legendary children, the passionate lover who showed favor to mortals by choosing them. But heroes don't assault women by transforming into animals. Heroes don't abandon their children and call it divine mystery. Heroes don't turn their wives into accomplices to their crimes. Zeus was starting to understand that he had never been the hero of any story. He had been the villain that other people had to survive. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and Zeus's heart was finally beating with the rhythm of a man who was ready to face the truth about himself. The truth was simple and devastating. Zeus had used his power to hurt people. He had confused desire with love. He had confused taking with giving. He had confused conquest with connection. Every story he had told himself about his actions was a lie. Every excuse he had made was a fiction. Every justification he had created was a fantasy designed to protect him from the reality of his own behavior. Zeus looked out over the mortal world and saw it clearly for the first time, not as his playground, but as a place full of people who deserved better than what he had given them. Somewhere down there, Io was still wandering as a cow, still carrying the weight of his assault and Hera's revenge, still living with the consequences of choices she had never made. Somewhere down there, Callisto was trapped in the stars as a bear, still paying the price for Zeus's deception and Hera's rage, still transformed beyond recognition because a god couldn't control his desires. Somewhere down there, Europa was ruling a kingdom named after her trauma, still living with the memory of being kidnapped by a bull, still carrying the weight of an assault that had shaped the geography of the world. Somewhere down there, Dano was raising Perseus alone, still trying to explain to her son why his father had appeared as golden rain, still dealing with the violation that had created a hero. Zeus had convinced himself that these women should feel honored by his attention, that they should be grateful for the power and status that came with bearing his children, that they should understand that being chosen by a god was a privilege, not a trauma, But Zeus was finally seeing the truth. None of these women had chosen him. None of them had consented to his attention. None of them had asked to be transformed, impregnated, or abandoned. They had simply existed in the wrong place at the wrong time when Zeus decided he wanted something. "I've been a monster," Zeus said to the empty palace. The words hung in the air like a confession, like a prayer, like the first honest thing Zeus had said in centuries. Zeus had spent his entire existence believing that power gave him the right to take what he wanted. That being a god meant being above mortal concepts like consent and consequences. That his desires were more important than other people's boundaries. But power without wisdom was just another form of chaos. Desire without respect was just another form of violence. Divine nature without moral restraint was just another form of evil. Zeus felt something break inside his chest, the last of his illusions about himself, the final fantasy that he was somehow the hero of his own story. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a good person. He was a powerful being who had used that power to hurt people and then spent centuries finding ways to avoid responsibility for that harm. Zeus asked the empty air. The question hung in the silence. For the first time in his immortal life, Zeus didn't have an answer. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have an excuse or a justification or a way to make this someone else's problem. He just had the truth. And the truth was that he had spent centuries hurting people and calling it love. Zeus thought about his children. Perseus, growing up, believing his father was absent by choice. Hercules, performing impossible labors to earn attention that should have been freely given. Dionysus, lost in wine and madness, searching for something he couldn't name. All of them powerful, all of them talented, all of them carrying the weight of having a father who had never learned how to be present. Zeus had given them divine blood, but he had never given them what they actually needed: time, attention, love, the simple presence of a father who chose them over his own desires. I failed them. The admission felt like lightning in his chest, painful and illuminating, and absolutely true. Zeus had failed as a husband. He had turned his wife into an accomplice to his crimes. He had made her choose between confronting him and losing him, and then punished her for making the choice that protected their marriage. Zeus had failed as a father. He had created children and then abandoned them to deal with the consequences of his divine nature. He had confused genetic legacy with actual parenting. Zeus had failed as a king. He had used his power to serve his own desires instead of protecting the people under his rule. He had turned justice into personal preference. Zeus had failed as a god. He had confused fear with love. He had confused taking what he wanted with earning what he deserved. But the biggest failure was simpler than all of that. Zeus had failed to be a good person. He had failed to consider other people's feelings. He had failed to respect other people's choices. He had failed to understand that power came with responsibility. Some stories echo through time because they show us that the hardest truth to face is the truth about ourselves. Zeus was finally seeing himself clearly, not as the powerful king he had imagined himself to be, not as the passionate lover he had convinced himself he was, not as the divine father he had pretended to be. He was seeing himself as his victims saw him, as a dangerous predator who used his power to take what he wanted, as a selfish god who cared more about his own desires than other people's safety, as a father who created children and then abandoned them to deal with the consequences alone. "I can't undo what I've done," Zeus said to the sunrise. The words felt like a death sentence. all the women he had hurt, all the children he had abandoned, all the pain he had caused. It was all permanent. It was all his fault. Zeus couldn't bring Io back to human form. He couldn't undo Callisto's transformation. He couldn't erase Europa's trauma or Danae's violation. He couldn't give his children the father they had needed. The damage was done. The harm was real. The consequences were permanent. But Zeus was finally understanding something that had taken him centuries to learn. Just because he couldn't undo the past didn't mean he couldn't choose to do better in the future. "I can stop," Zeus said to the morning light. "I can choose to stop." The words felt like a revolution, like a promise, like the first step toward becoming someone better than he had been. Zeus couldn't fix what he had broken, but he could stop breaking new things. He could choose to respect boundaries. He could choose to consider other people's feelings. He could choose to use his power to protect instead of to take. Zeus looked out over the mortal world one last time as the god he had been. Tomorrow, he would start learning how to be the god he should have been all along. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't fix the damage he had already caused. It wouldn't bring back the women he had hurt or give his children the father they had deserved. But it would be honest. It would be real. It would be the first step toward becoming someone who deserved the power he had been given. Zeus felt something shift in the very fabric of his being. The recognition that love required respect, that power required responsibility, that desire required consent. "I want to do better," Zeus said to the dawn. The words felt like a prayer, like a confession, like the beginning of a very long journey toward becoming someone better than he had been. Zeus had spent centuries being the villain of other people's stories. He had spent centuries taking what he wanted and calling it love. He had spent centuries using his power to hurt people and then finding ways to avoid responsibility for that harm. But stories don't end with the villain staying the villain. The best stories show us that even the worst people can choose to change, that even the most powerful people can learn to use their power wisely, that even the most selfish people can learn to care about someone other than themselves. Zeus was finally ready to start that story. The story of becoming better. The story of choosing wisdom over power. The story of learning that love requires respect, even when you're powerful enough to take what you want without asking. Some stories echo through time because they remind us that it's never too late to choose to be better. That power without wisdom is just another form of chaos. That real strength comes from protecting people, not from taking what you want from them. Zeus had finally learned the lesson that had taken him centuries to understand. He had finally faced the truth about himself. He had finally chosen to stop being the villain of other people's stories. The damage was done. The harm was real. The consequences were permanent. But Zeus was finally ready to stop creating new damage. Finally ready to start learning how to be the god he should have been all along. The story continues in the choices we make every day, in the decision to respect other people's boundaries, in the choice to use our power to protect instead of to take, in the understanding that love requires respect even when we're powerful enough to take what we want without asking. And so the ancient stories remind us that even gods must learn to be better, that even the most powerful beings must choose wisdom over desire, that even the king of the gods must face the consequences of his choices. Sleep well, knowing that every day brings the chance to choose wisdom over power, to choose respect over desire, to choose love over conquest. The story ends, but the lessons continue in every choice we make, in every boundary we respect, in every moment we choose to be better than we were before. Ancient hearts beat with familiar rhythms, and the best rhythm of all is the rhythm of a heart that has learned to love with respect, to desire with boundaries, and to use power with wisdom. Dream peacefully, knowing that even gods must eventually learn to be better. And if gods can change, then so can we all. The story is complete, but the journey toward being better never ends. Sweet dreams, and may your choices always